So we are starting a new episode of Liberty Chats here at Fundación Libertad, and we have a really special guest today with us. And I say today because it could be any moment of the day that you are watching this and you're listening to this from wherever you are, all across the globe. And he speaks in French, he speaks in English. He has told me that he also speaks in Spanish from time to time. So we are really pleased to have Michel Kelly-Gagnon with us here. He's president and CEO of the Montreal Economic Institute, MEI. So he's in Canada. Michel, so pleased to have you here with us. How are you doing?
Doing great, Garret. How about you?
I'm doing perfect, and I'm really glad that you are joining us to chat with us about the liberty movement, about you, about your life, about things and how things are going in Canada, which usually seems so far away when one is in Argentina, for example, so many kilometers in the middle. So we're really glad to have you. We just said that you're president and CEO of the Montreal Economic Institute. What we have not said yet is that you are also a lawyer, a businessman, that you have dedicated your life to the private sector as well, that you have practiced law over there. How were your beginnings when it comes to the liberty movement? How did you end up liking and following and promoting these ideas?
Yeah, it's, I would say that I discovered these ideas around the age of maybe 18 or 19 years old. But actually, the word discover it would not be the proper term, in the sense that I think I had these instincts. I had an intuitive understanding of the importance of liberty for as far as I can remember, as I was a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. But of course, at this age, it was only intuitive. So when I was 18, I read some books by a writer called Pierre Lemieux. He's an economist and a philosopher, has written many books, the majority of them in the US in English. And I also read Frédéric Bastiat. And again, it was like these authors put words and put like a logical structure on the intuitions that I already had.
So you just mentioned you read Bastiat, which is like a big thing down here in Argentina as well. We also really like that French author. We like his ideas on what you can see and you cannot see, which is actually usually useful to try to understand what's wrong with big government and when the state and public sector makes decisions that actually are not the way that they are supposed to be. What other authors do you consider interesting besides the two you just mentioned?
Oh, I mean, there's many that can be mentioned. I guess like many, I was influenced by Ayn Rand, more by her novels than her philosophical essays, and even more particularly by Fountainhead, which, to this day is one of my favorite novels. Whereas Atlas Shrugged, I mean, it was okay, but I did not really connect so much with Atlas Shrugged. So I think that was clearly, something that influenced me. And then another author that actually influenced Ayn Rand and was kind of a mentor to Ayn Rand was Isabel Patterson. The God in the Machine, I think, is a source of inspiration. Like many of us, I have read Milton Friedman. I was also impressed by like interviews that you can hear on YouTube, or elsewhere, interviews with Milton Friedman, with his pedagogical capacity to express himself, orally, not just in writing, because sometimes you have people who are great writers but are not so good speakers. Then in terms of more contemporary writers, I guess Pete Bucky is really kind of creative. And I have recently, I had read several years ago, but I'm starting to discover more Deirdre McCloskey, which I think her insights are quite powerful, because we tend to have, a mechanical vision about economics, but probably the most important reason, why we have capitalism is probably more philosophical and cultural than institutional in a way. Well, it's all interrelated. So I mean, these are just a few of the authors, and then there is one that's on my table that I had read, I think 27 or 28 years ago, but I feel I must reread, is Higgs, the historian Higgs, with Crisis and Leviathan, who explains, this idea, which I think is very relevant in the current context, that when there is a crisis, the power of the government increase, and when the crisis subsides, the power of the government does go down, but not back all the way to prior to the crisis. There is a ratchet. I think he says ratchet. I'm not sure, but there is kind of a system where, let's say on a scale of 0 to 10, if the power of government is 6 prior to the crisis, a crisis comes in, power of government increases to 9, the crisis disappears, but the power of government doesn't go back to 6, it goes back to 7 or 7.5 or 8. And therefore, at every crisis, the government becomes bigger. And so I think that this idea, which is not just an idea, because Higgs is first and foremost an historian, and he shows with historical examples the validity of his thesis. I think with COVID, I feel that's exactly what's going to happen.
So many interesting points you just raised, Michel. We actually had Deirdre McCloskey here this year. We had her in person last year. She's absolutely great. She's a delight, and what she writes, actually, I mean, it's not only educating but entertaining. You can follow her ideas and how she meshes history and economics and institutions in a way that it's really easy to follow, which are usually hard to grasp issues. And you also mentioned Milton Friedman, and I think that there's a thread, an idea to follow there on the importance of developing speaking skills, not just writing skills, not just being able to put into paper complex ideas, but also being able to explain those ideas when it comes to one-on-one discussions or when it comes to television, radio. And this crisis and power of government relation that you just put forth, which actually really, as you said, encompasses some of the worries that I think most of us in the liberty movement have had this year, when it comes to COVID, when it comes to 2021, when it comes to whatever's going to happen next year. I think that this ties nicely with this next question. How do you see the freedom movement in Canada in particular? And would you say that there's a need in a global sense of further development when it comes to speaking skills?
Oh yeah, I mean, if I start with the second part of your question, I think the ability to communicate with both verbal and non-verbal, is a skill, a skill set that we should always be trying to improve. And even when we think that we are good, we should keep on improving, because and not just for the purpose of the liberty movement, but just for the flourishing of our life. Whether if it's with our interactions with our friends, with our girlfriend or boyfriend, or in a more political context, the ability to articulate ideas in a way that is both coherent and pleasant, I think is an immense skill. And I was reading this summer a short biography about Winston Churchill. I've read several, but this one in particular was making a focus on his speaking ability. And basically, one of the things I remember from this book is that, yes, people say Winston Churchill was a great speaker, which is true, But people tend to equate or assume that it means that it was completely natural for him, that he could push a button and then automatically be a great speaker. But actually, when you read his biography about him, he put a lot of sweat in practicing his speeches. There is this specific speech where he was speaking to the caucus of the Conservative Party at a dinner at a private club in London, trying to convince the caucus of the Conservative Party to basically adopt a policy by which the British government would really engage and fight Hitler. And so, he knew that this was, a major speech, because at that time, there was still a majority of the caucus of the Conservative Party, which was forming the government, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yes.
And the majority was still opposed to really fighting Hitler. And he had managed to get them to gather into this private club. And he made a speech, to them of a couple of minutes. And apparently, he spent his entire day from early in the morning until that time to repeat and practice and rewrite each word of the speech for 75 times before he spoke, okay? And so even people who might be considered as a gifted speaker, really, they are putting a lot of sweat. So it's a long answer, but to say yes, it's a skill that's important to learn, but once you have learned it, it's important to keep on improving on it.
Yes, and then we have this second question tied to that one, Michel, which relates to Canada. What can you tell us about what Canada is going through right now to people that might not actually know about things over there?
One professor of economics, a famous professor in Canada, Reuven Brenner, has said to me that when you evaluate the relative position of a country, he said, it doesn't matter how much you screw up. What matters is how much you screw up relative to others. And so the Canadian government, especially the current Canadian government, has been screwing up terribly. It's, in my opinion, one of the worst federal government we've had in the past 40 years. But in relative terms, okay, I mean, Canada is still in a pretty good position. And so things are going, quote unquote, bad. But if you compare them to most other countries, we are still, whether in terms of public finance, whether in terms of the overall wealth of the population, of the economy, of the stability, we are still in the top 5 or 7 countries in the world. And this is what is kind of discouraging, because we have a government that is doing some very bad things. We're trying to fight them, but their answer is yes, but we are much better than all the other ones. And to that argument, it's kind of true, actually.
But I guess, Michel, that there's a thing that usually happens, that people see the defects of the countries that they live in better when they are living in those countries. So of course you are going to be able to see things about Canada that we would not be able to do, as I do about Argentina, as someone would do about France or whatever. Thing is, do you think that the gap might be getting narrower and shorter between countries that are not as powerful or as rich or in that top 7% than what it used to be before when it comes to Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of the relative statistics. I could not say that in a scientific answer. My sense is, for example, in South America, if I take a country that I know, because I am married to, my wife is from Peru. And so I know, and most of her family is still in Peru. So and we go there and things, for many years, Peru had been going in the right direction. Things were improving, the economy was improving. Yes, you had some corrupt governments, but by and large, the policies were, reasonably good. But now, in the last 2 years, and especially in the last 6 months, it's going in a really bad direction. So,
yeah, like Argentina.
Yeah, and so I guess what I'm saying is some of these countries were catching up, whether to Canada or just richer countries in general, okay? They were catching up, but it seems like there is a destructive impulse amongst the people, amongst populations, and when things start to improve, it's like they are drawn to bad policies to stop it from improving, which is kind of crazy. It's like a death wish, And same with Chile. Chile had very sound economic policies for many years, and now it's like, I don't know, they have been drinking a drink of madness.
Yeah, there's this former minister of economy that I met, Rolf Luders from Chile. So he has this theory that Argentina and Chile always tend to arrive at the same point, even if one of the countries looks to be better and well off or whatever, they end up making mistakes and they will end up at the same place. He has these correlations from like 100 to 100 years back, and he shows, okay, every time that Argentina was over Chile, so they made a mistake and they ended up under Chile. And every time that Chile was over Argentina, they also made a mistake. So it seems some countries are bound to make the same mistakes. It's like it's in their DNA or their destiny, or who knows. So we are speaking about Canada. You're the president and CEO of the Montreal Economic Institute. What can you tell us about what MEI is doing over there?
Yeah, so we have our regular pipeline of publications, which typically every given year focuses on healthcare reform, because Canada has a very socialist healthcare system, the most socialist healthcare system of the economically developed world. So we do a lot of healthcare, we do a lot of focus on regulation and regulatory burden. And we also focus on sort of natural resource development / environment. So these are our historical pillars. But this year, because of COVID, we had to pivot and also start doing work on what has been, in my opinion, and the opinion of many, the most consequential public policy, debates of the past 20 years. In terms of impact, the way governments reacted to the pandemic has had an impact that we will feel for decades. So we were drawn into that debate, which was delicate because even within our own board and our own donors, not everybody was in agreement to what to think about this. And so we kind of focused on two main things. One aspect was we focused on sort of small micro suggestions to help specific industries that were hurt by the situation. Like, for instance, we had suggestions regarding the restaurant industry and how certain liberalization could help them. And actually, our recommendation has been adopted into law, I think, last week.
Awesome.
And so that was positive. And then the other one was on the higher level about what I would call the science, the data science of COVID. So not the medical aspect of it, because obviously we are not medical doctors, but about the statistical methods that were used by a certain number of epidemiologists in order to justify certain projections, certain models, that these models then had a great influence on the actual policies that were adopted by the governments. And so the most famous one being Professor Ferguson from London, who was dubbed Dr. Lockdown. And we were the first ones in Canada, not the first ones in the world, but the first ones in Canada to make a detailed analysis of the technical mistakes of Professor Ferguson in his work, some of which since then he has admitted. But
I mean, he resigned, so
he resigned. But he resigned because he had
for a different issue. But yeah,
so, you know, but still, anyway. But he was under fire for clear. And the point being that, you know, I think this teaches us a lot about both the power and the danger of social sciences when you have studies like these that become the landmark for decisions by governments. I mean, Boris Johnson made a total 180-degree U-turn, essentially based on that false study or partly false study. And so we felt that we had a duty to pinpoint those mistakes and inform governments in Canada that, you know, of the reality that a lot of these studies were not particularly serious. On that front, I would say, honestly, we have had less success than on our more micro recommendations.
Michel, you're mentioning such profound points because, I mean, I don't know if you've heard about it, maybe you haven't, but Argentina has had probably the longest lockdown in the whole world when it comes to COVID. It's been a lockdown that at least since June, people have not actually been complying a lot, but when it comes to the letter of the law, we are supposedly in lockdown. You are not supposed to meet, at least in the province where I live, in Santa Fe. At the time where we are recording this, you're not supposed to visit your family indoors, and examples such as that. People do that anyway because, I mean, it's human nature. You cannot hold people inside their houses, inside their homes forever. But we actually have not heard a lot about how was the government's response when it comes to COVID in Canada. Was it draconian? Was it harsh? I mean, you mentioned that you had a lot of success at having these debates and putting forth these points and discussions. So I guess that shops and restaurants were closed over there as well. Did you have rules when it comes to mixing with meeting other people? Do those rules still exist?
Yeah, so what people from outside of Canada have to understand is Canada is a federal state. And so a lot of the decisions regarding COVID concerning lockdown or these kinds of decisions were actually decided individually by each provincial government. And I would say the general trend has been a pretty hard lockdown, although the government of Quebec, in its second lockdown, was less aggressive, less severe than in the first lockdown. But now they are under tremendous pressure to become more severe. And actually, there is a rumor that they're going to announce today or maybe tomorrow that they're going to become a more hard lockdown. So I guess since March, we've seen all the different versions, from soft ones where it's only like restaurants and bars that are closed, to hard ones where, you know, I cannot even visit my mother who is 82 years old and lives alone, okay? And anything in between. And sometimes businesses closed and sometimes businesses not closed. It has varied. But I think what's interesting is that now the provincial government of Quebec, which is kind of a centrist government in a way, has recognized that there are many perverse effects to the lockdowns, and which is something they were not admitting at first, or not publicly anyway. And now at least, you know, they are saying, well, we might do it, but we have to realize that this is going to create a lot of problems. And so, you know, we'll see. And even now, you know, in the past, it was a lockdown that was like for months and months. And now they are announcing that this harder lockdown will be only for 14 days. So, you know, I think it's still, from a libertarian perspective, pretty bad. But from a real politics perspective, we have seen kind of an improvement in the behavior of the provincial government of my province. And then in other provinces, it really, really varies not only for ideological reasons, but also because in some provinces, it's like almost like barren land. I mean, there's maybe one person for, 500 kilometers. So, you are in perpetual lockdown. There's just nobody around you, I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you know what I mean. So I think some places in Canada, all this debate about lockdown was a little bit of an abstraction.
Michel, don't you find it perplexing that the people have been so willing to actually accept most of these changes, most of these rules, that maybe, as you said before, when crisis come, the government gets bigger, gets more powerful, and they end up being more powerful than they were before the crisis, when crises are over, that people have accepted things that in 2021 or in 2022, they might continue and they might be a gateway for worse decisions in the future.
No, you're right. And I'm just trying to find, because there is a quote on my website that I would like to read to you and your listeners. If I don't find it, I'll just make a general comment, and you can look it up.
We'll put it on the screen. Yeah, I will put it on the screen.
Yeah. But anyway, so this quote is from a writer from Reason magazine, the libertarian magazine from California. And in essence, he says, the real revelation about COVID is not that governments took away freedom. No, the real revelation was how much the general public liked it. Okay? And I would go even further. If I look in the case of the province of Quebec, it's not just that the government restricted liberties, it's that actually, if you look at the polls or the commentary on open radio show and stuff, it was actually the general public was asking for these restrictions, was putting pressure. And when the government put restrictions, often what you would hear in the media is criticism against the government, not about these restrictions, but about the fact that there was not enough restrictions, and they were asking for more. So in this specific case of what I experienced, the problem was not so much with the government, it was with the public at large, who was even more anti-freedom than the government. And so, this quote, I think you could put it on the screen, and it capsulizes what I am explaining. And to me, I would say that's the part of the debate that made me, I would say, have I'm going to say a mild depression. Okay, I was like a little bit depressed, because for me to see governments to violate individual liberties, I mean, I've been used to that. I've been a libertarian since I'm 20. I'm now almost 50 years old. I have 30 years of experience of seeing that. I'm almost blasé about it. I would never be surprised. I mean, I'm not happy, but I'm never surprised when a government violates the liberties. It's the nature of the beast. But to see my fellow citizen clap their hands and demand for more, that has kind of discouraged me, because I said that, if I have the government against me, it's one thing. But if I have 75 or 80% of my fellow citizens, I mean, that's much worse.
It really is. And I think it goes back to when we were discussing about the Montreal Economic Institute and what you do. And I always remember this anecdote that you told me in a class the first time I saw you, which was about the elevator pitch. What can you tell us about your job and some challenges and gratifications, things that have made you happy over the years?
To have a job where you can fight for what you believe in, it is a great blessing. Furthermore, in the past 10 years, because of the growth of the organization and its good finances. Not only have I been able to do this, but I've been able to make a very good living while doing it. So that's even more interesting because, at the beginning of my career, I had to make a compromise between, making money and fighting for freedom. And now I'm fighting for freedom and making money. So, I think it's a real blessing. So I count myself as being very, I would say lucky, because in life you make your own luck, but blessed, I would say. But I think this is partly related to the fact that I understood early on the power and the importance of fundraising. And they're related to that, because if you're fundraising, that's one thing to have fundraising skills, but it's also the marketing of your own organization, which is related to your capacity to fundraise, right? They go hand in hand. It's basically, what in corporate world they call sales and marketing. And I think that, some intellectuals sometimes have like a snobbish view about sales and marketing, as if it's kind of a lower, less important thing. But I think that if you want to make a living out of this, and you are not like a university professor that gets the usual salary from the government, then sales and marketing is as important as philosophy or economics.
Sometimes even more, I'd argue. And that's a lawyer in me speaking, of course, as well. So we are about to hit the 30-minute mark, and I would like to touch further upon some issues as well, because you mentioned a lot of authors, and those were great examples. But I would like to go back to Milton Friedman, because I think that he left a big mark when it comes to public speaking, when it comes to trying to push ideas in new envelopes, in new ways. I mean, back when he did TV, it was not a usual thing to do, and it was really revolutionary. Do you think that the liberty movement should continue that trend when it comes to finding new venues, new ways of presenting those ideas? I mean, technology has been for so long. I mean, the new technologies and internet, but they are a given. But what would you say on that topic?
Well, I am a bit of a caveman when it comes to technology per se. And, so I'm not, I mean, of course, I can repeat like, obvious things, that these things are important, social media, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, that's not very original. What I am trying to see now, and what my organization will focus on in 2021, one of the things we'll focus on, is to try to help the creation of what I call cultural products. So novels, humoristic shows, maybe jingles, maybe songs, cultural products. Because clearly, if there is a sector where the left has had a complete total victory, is in culture. Okay, they own culture, almost like 95% of it. So if you want to show a little animation for your children or your grandchildren, you have half probability that this little kid animation will contain some ideological brainwashing about radical environmentalism or whatever. Then if you are watching an Hollywood movie, I mean, as soon as there is even a little ounce of economics or politics, it's almost invariably to the left, and I would even say to the hard left. And these things percolate in the mind of people. They watch these shows, they watch these programs, they hear these singers say these things, and it really shapes their opinion. And it shapes their opinion in a way where they don't even know that their opinion are being shaped. And so I think that in the long term, if the liberty movement has any chance of having even a remote fair battle, it has to invest in the field of the production of cultural products, and not my view on this, so I have a fairly precise view on this, if I may continue just for a moment, is it's not just about, because what I saw was in the past, some libertarian nerds who said, okay, I'm gonna write a novel. And usually they write incredibly shitty novels, okay, that are not good, that no one wants to read, not even a libertarian, okay? I've seen plenty of that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is try to identify people who are already proven as talented producers of cultural products. So an established novelist, an established singer, who shows a little bit of interest, a little bit of curiosity, and then provide this person with ideas, with money, hopefully, so that this person can produce these cultural products that have this libertarian angle, but that they can produce it in a way where it's good stuff, where it's stuff that anybody would want to listen to or to watch, whether or not they are actually libertarian.
I 100% agree with this cultural product, cultural objects idea. I mean, you just defined and conceptualized it perfectly, Michel. I have 2 or 3 more questions, and the last 2 are going to be short, and I'm going to come back to those. But I have one that is, of course, I mean, it's obvious, but it has a good way of circling about what we have been talking about. What do you see happening in 2021? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but if you had to make your predictions, at least for the first semester or for the first trimester, I'm not going to ask you what's going to happen in December 2021. How are you seeing those things?
Public policy-wise, I think it's going to be all over the place, and I have a real time really being able to project. But I fear this ratchet effect that we've discussed. I think in terms of economics, you know, at least in my part of the world, the economy was going pretty good before COVID. And so I think that once it's under control, the economy should kick back again. It was not a real recession, it was an artificially induced recession. And also, obviously, we're seeing the vaccine. I think some normalcy will get back. Some people say next summer, some people say maybe in September of next year before we have a critical mass, you know, of this. So I see the second part of 2021 as pretty positive or reasonably positive in terms of, you know, travel and these kinds of freedom, you know. But in terms of government policies, I hope we will be able to get it back on the right track, but I will not bet my life on that.
So the last 2 questions that you mentioned about your wife, she's Peruvian. So how's your Spanish? That
Bueno,
we'll talk about.
Me defiendo, pero es como si yo soy un niño de 9 años que no es muy inteligente.
Eso estuvo muy bien, de cualquier forma, hasta el acento estuvo bien, Michel. And the last one, because we know you are in Canada and you're in Montreal, in Quebec, you don't have the 70, 80, 90 thing that people in France do, right? You do them a different way, right? The numbers.
I didn't catch the. Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well. Oh, but we do it. It's more like I think Belgium and Switzerland that says it differently. I think France. Most of France is pretty similar to us. 70, 80, 90. It's in Switzerland. They say 90.
Which is easier.
Well, I don't know. I guess it's a question of perspective of how you were educated.
That's right. So we want to thank you, Michel, for joining us today. We had a lot of fun having you with us here, and we hope the audience did as well when they listened to us. And thank you for joining us.
Gracias, y espero que nos vemos en Argentina in, digamos, 2022. I hope to come to Argentina.
Perfecto, 2022, estaremos encantados, Michel, de tenerte con nosotros. Y ya que lo dije en español, lo cierro en español. Acabamos de finalizar la entrevista con Michel Kelly-Gagnon, el presidente y el CEO del Montreal Economic Institute, y lo hicimos aquí en Liberty Chats de Fundación Libertad. Hasta la próxima.
¡Viva la libertad!
That's a great one as well.